One of the questions that I get asked most often by aspiring pitmasters is, what's the difference between a competition brisket and a backyard brisket? We're going to try to point out the 5 major differences and show you guys something that'll help you make a good educated decision and help you decide if you want to step into the barbecue competition world and make that leap of faith. All right, barbecue lovers, the first point I want to discuss today between the backyard and the competition brisket is the selection of the brisket. What type of brisket do you want to cook in the backyard, and what type of brisket do you need to cook in a competition? First of all, in the backyard, you're really just cooking to impress your family and your friends. 9 times out of 10, you're trying to be economical and don't want to spend a bunch of money. So a good choice is a good choice, or a prime. Nowadays, there's a lot of primes out there. They're fairly inexpensive. We buy a lot of our primes for somewhere between, $50 and $75. You can get a really, really good brisket in that price range for the backyard. Now, some guys like to cook select. If you're cooking for chopped brisket, man, get the cheapest one out there, chop it up, add a little barbecue sauce, and have a ball. When it comes to competition, it's a little different game. The level of competitiveness out there today is so close, so tight. You cannot likely get away with a cheap brisket, a select brisket. Once in a while, they may be labeled wrong. You may have one that is a beautiful select or a beautiful choice that looks every bit as good as a high-end prime. That does happen, but in general, that's just a lucky situation. Most of the time, you want to look for a good brand name prime at the very least, or a lot of guys nowadays are cooking prime certified Angus briskets or 1855 briskets. A really great choice from Swift. Now the big thing now is everybody's cooking Wagyu too. The Wagyu and the Akashi seem to be taking Texas at least by storm, as well as the rest of the country. Outside of Texas, probably the #1 brand out there is a Snake River Farms brisket. They're well known for being really good marbled. So those briskets generally are ready to go, and that seems to be the standard outside of Texas. They're also starting to be very popular here in Texas as well. So the first point, as I said, is selecting the right brisket. When you're comparing between a backyard and a comp brisket, the selection is the difference between getting just a nice, happy brisket at home and getting a winning brisket at a competition. Now, I also want to add that, a really good 1855 high-end prime or certified Angus brisket, a Wagyu or an Akashi, all these high-dollar, high-end briskets are equally wonderful in the backyard. If you can afford and want to spend a little bit more on a backyard brisket that's a higher end, they do produce a really great brisket even in the backyard. The reason they win in the competitions is because they are a better quality all-around brisket. And if they win in competitions, they can win in your backyard too, because they really are great products. So once again, guys, if you're in the backyard, you can cook a less expensive brisket, or you can still cook a really good high-end brisket with some excellent, wonderful results, even without injecting. But if you are a competitor, I can assure you, you do need to spend a little bit more money on those better, higher quality briskets in order to be competitive in today's cook-off community. So remember again, the selection process, whether it's backyard or competition, there is a little bit of a difference there, actually a lot. But if you're a competitor, you definitely want to step it up, spend a little bit more money if you want to be in the top 10 or in the top 5 on a regular basis. All right, now this brings us to point number 2. The next difference between the backyard and the comp brisket is the trimming process. The trimming at home in the backyard is fairly minimal. You kind of just want to get about 1/8 to 1/4 inch of fat on the bottom, and you want to trim the top, get all the big heavy fat. You don't necessarily have to take off all that membrane, that super thin membrane. I've cooked hundreds and hundreds of briskets without doing that with excellent results, so it's not necessary. However, when it comes to competition trimming, we are very aggressive on trimming. All we want is about 9 inches width and a little bit longer length. All we need is 9 slices in Texas, and of course, all you need is a few slices, I think a minimum of 6 in KCBS, so it's a much smaller brisket. You want it to look really, really pretty before you cook it, so you don't have to chop it up or make it look ugly by trimming it after you cook it. You want it to look pretty before you cook it so that it looks really pretty when it goes into the box. Remember, there are points for presentation, so the better it looks going in the box, the better your points, the better your chances are of getting a walk or possibly winning the competition based on your brisket results. One of the reasons we don't trim too aggressively in the backyard is because we're usually going to feed family and friends. So you want to maximize the yield and get as much meat as you possibly can in the smoker and out of the smoker. So you always want to have as much meat on the grill as you possibly can. Now, not to say that you're going to throw any of the trimmings away on the competition brisket. I sure don't. I like to use those for beef stew, for carne guisada, makes an awesome chili. But my most favorite thing to do with trimmings off of a competition brisket is hamburgers. Have you ever had a Wagyu hamburger brisket? Oh my gosh, you don't know what you're missing until you try one. So it does take a little mastery and a little bit of technique. It's just applied a little bit different between the backyard brisket and the competition brisket. That wraps it up for point number 2. All right, now that brings us to point number 3. To inject or not to inject. In the backyard, it is pretty traditional and customary to not inject at all. I can tell you for certain that at home, my personal briskets that I cook for us to eat are not injected. That's the way I like to eat it. You know, most top-notch barbecue restaurants do not inject their briskets either. It really, in my opinion, is not necessary. You can do it to experiment with maybe a little different flavor profiles. You can put a little salt and pepper and let it melt down or grind it down into a fine powder and put some beef broth in there. It will enhance the flavor some. It will help some. But in general, it's not customary nor necessary to inject a backyard brisket if you're cooking it properly. Just remember, guys, that the brisket cooked in the backyard, cooked at most traditional barbecue restaurants, the brisket itself has so much collagen, a lot of connective tissue. It tends to break down somewhere around 185 degrees, and if you cook it like that long enough and at the right temperature, it will break down that stuff, and it's just going to be a really succulent, delicious, wonderful brisket. That's the way most of us like to eat them. That's the way most restaurants do it. And so it just really isn't necessary to inject a backyard brisket, but you can if you want to. Now, the competition brisket is a little bit of a whole different animal. At home, we're cooking for enjoyment. In the backyard, we want to enjoy that brisket and eat as much of it as we can. In a competition, you're not really cooking for yourself. You're cooking for a panel of judges. In Texas, many judges if it's a big event and it goes multiple rounds. So what we're shooting for in a competition brisket is that, boom, one bite flavor. There's a balance there. You don't want to overdo it. You want them to like your brisket. You want them to give you a good score. But there is a point of no return where you kind of overdo things. But the reason we do inject and we add injection powders and other ingredients is to maximize that one bite flavor. That enhances the experience of the judge while he's at the judging table. Hopefully you did it right and you get a great score and you're able to move on to the next round or make the top 10, top 5, possibly even win in the brisket category by injecting your competition briskets. I can tell you guys nowadays, it pretty much, if you want to be competitive in barbecue competitions anywhere in the country, it is necessary to inject. Without question, many of us that are well-known top pitmasters, not only in Texas but throughout the country, have indeed tried cooking a really good backyard brisket in competitions. I can tell you that 10 out of 10 times, the non-injected brisket is not going to make the cut. The injected brisket is going to win 10 out of 10 times, guaranteed. And that's especially true when the judge only gets one bite to sample your brisket. That brings us to point number 4 on the difference between competition and backyard brisket. When it comes to the backyard brisket, it's not really any different. There are no right ways or wrong ways when it comes to rubs. But basically the traditional and old school way of briskets was just basically salt and pepper. Nowadays, there's so many great rubs on the market that contain way more than salt and pepper, that are wonderful, they're excellent. They create a little bit better flavor profile than just salt and pepper. Although you can never go wrong with salt and pepper. I personally like them myself, but there's so many other good ones out there now. You can enhance the salt and pepper with a little bit of garlic, a little bit of onion, a little bit of paprika, a little bit of New Mexico chili powder, my personal favorite. There's just a lot of things you can add into it to really still enhance the flavor of the backyard brisket. If you want to just use salt and pepper, that's perfectly all right too. You'll still produce a great brisket. Now in the comp brisket, whole different game. Now again, there's a lot of comp-oriented rubs out there that are designed specifically to create and enhance that one bite flavor of competition briskets. But in general, the rub process on competition briskets is going to be a layering process. Most of us run anywhere from 2 to as many as 5, 6 layers of different rubs. It becomes an orchestra of flavors, a melody that plays in your mouth. There are also enhancers to enhance the flavor both in the injection and in the rubbing process. So they have to work well together. The rubs and the injection and the meat has to all work well together. In addition to that, we also glaze or sauce our brisket around all the way around to enhance that one bite flavor. So the rub process is a layering process for competition. There's some that go really well together and enhance that one bite experience for the judges. So you pretty much nowadays, if you want to win in competitions, you're going to need to layer some rubs, more than one or two probably, and you're going to need to also glaze it and enhance that flavor as well. To balance out the salt, the pepper, and whatever rub ingredients you have along with that really good, delicious injected meat. Again, the difference can be also nowadays, I mean, it's not just salt, pepper. In the backyard, there's so many great opportunities for you to put your own flavor print on it. Some people like herbs on their brisket rub, some people don't. Some like to sear their brisket, some don't. So there's an endless possibility of ways to enhance the flavor of your brisket, make it your own unique flavor profile. It's just really up to you, whatever you decide you want to do. And this applies also to the competition brisket. The rubbing process allows you to put in your own flavor print, if you want to call it that. It becomes your brisket and your individual profile. It's fun experimenting and playing with different flavors. We do it all the time, you know, and that's how we learn, by the way, too. So feel free to experiment, try a bunch of different rubs, try salt, pepper plus a rub. You know, I mean, the possibilities are endless. There's no right way or wrong way. Whatever you and your family like I've always said, is the right way. This brings us to point number 5, to wrap or not to wrap. What are the differences between backyard and competition? Traditionally in the backyard, and a lot of your old school restaurants never used to wrap at all. So a lot of guys in the backyard like to cook really low and slow. It's a long process. It's a labor of love. You can produce an amazing, wonderful, succulent, juicy brisket doing it that way if you want to put in the time and the effort. Nowadays in the backyard, it's very traditional to wrap with butcher paper, pink butcher paper. Some guys still like to use foil in the backyard. You can do it any way you want. But me personally, I like to use butcher paper at home with a backyard brisket. It just really kind of helps preserve that really good smoky barbecue flavor instead of the roasty flavor using foil sometimes. But you don't have to wrap. Some guys like to use water pans. That also keeps the brisket moist and keeps it from drying out a little bit. Me personally, I don't use water pans. I've tried them. They're great, they work. I just don't feel like it's necessary. But that's just my preference. A lot of guys do like to use it. If it works for you, then more power to you. Generally, if you're gonna wrap at home, I recommend butcher paper at a little bit slower temperature cooking process. If you're cooking really hot and fast, you might wanna use foil. Now in competition setting, you know, we like to use foil, and that is the normal traditional way to cook brisket in competition. Me personally, I use a pan. Competitions, we're gonna usually add a little bit of liquid in there to make that brisket pop a little bit better for the judges. I like using pans because when I'm sliding it around on the pit, I know for sure I'm not gonna tear the bottom of that foil and lose all my au jus. Now there are some guys that cook low and slow in competition, use butcher paper. I swear there's a few guys out there still that don't wrap at all. If that works for you, then more power to you, but I can assure you that mostly everybody in competition wraps in aluminum foil or pans. All right, my barbecue loving friends, now here's a bonus point. In both cases, backyard or competition, what you really want to do is let that brisket rest. An hour to 3 hours is ideal, 3 is better. Let that brisket temperature come down nice and slow. Let it come down, cool down a little bit. When that brisket's resting, it's rehydrating and it's reabsorbing some of your au jus if you have some in a pan or in a foil. And even if it's in butcher paper, it cools off slow, the juices redistribute. So before you go take your knife, start slicing that thing away, let it cool off, let it rest for a while. I promise you the results and the flavor differences you're gonna be very satisfied with and very glad that you got to let that brisket rest for a while. All right, Pitmasters, that wraps up the 5 tips plus the bonus. Remember that these are 2 totally different types of brisket for 2 totally different crowds. Both of them excellent in their own respective ways. And understanding that is really the first step out of many steps to smoking perfect brisket and all the barbecue meats. If you actually want to learn all of these steps, then head over to pitmasterclass.us where I teach you everything you need to know about how to cook the best possible barbecue in the backyard and for cook-offs. The link is down below. Now, if you really want to learn specifically how to smoke backyard brisket, then you can check out my Brisket Master Class, where I show you exactly how to smoke a backyard brisket from start to finish, including the selection process, trimming, rubbing, saucing, enhancing flavor profiles, and smoking it on a variety of different cookers like stick burners, drums, kettles, and pellet grills to get you smoking briskets that are just as good as the most famous barbecue houses in no time. That link is also down below. Okay, barbecue lovers, that's all I have for y'all today. I hope this video helped you learn more about barbecue and brisket. Be sure to like, comment, and share, and subscribe. Ring the bell, and remember, keep the smoke light and make it work. Boom!